Good morning, everyone. Today we're hopping into Popcross Studios to finally start in the only Mythal storyline. Let's hop in and see how these gods became killers. Or how these gods slayed killers. Let's find out.
Tales are told around the campfire at the Trismegistus Academy for Heroic Enlightenment of mythical heroes from different worlds that the different students come from. The most recent of these tales was told by a student named Parvel Markopoulos, and in the world he hails from, gods considered myths in other realms are very much real. Or at least variations of them are. The gods of Greek mythology, Norse, Celtic, Egyptian, Japanese, and more existed and went through countless wars over territory, followers, and more often, simply petty pride and jealousy. You see, at a time, the gods had been an important part of how their respective corners of the globe functioned. But as they began discovering and interacting with other pantheons from other regions, it quickly became clear that neither humans nor gods knew how to share the world well. Some gods stayed true to their original purpose and calling, but a lot of them just devolved into becoming the absolute worst. Over the centuries in between,
I'm gonna guess that Odin and Zeus definitely became even worse than they are worse than they are already.
Between the wars, gods from different lands would mate with each other, or with mortals. And if a mortal rejected their advances, or if a god found a mortal that was prettier than them or something, they'd often turn them into a snake lady or a spider or a goatfish with hippo teeth or whatever weird thing they came up with, because a lot of them were just super petty. All this breeding, though, led to the world becoming even more full of new gods and demigods, many of whom wanted power for themselves. Some would assert their power by creating monsters to do their bidding, and this just made the world an even more chaotic place. Life within cities also became more and more divided, as different people swore by following different gods, and it was nearly a daily event for civil wars to break out between people who swore their gods could fix the world, and other people's were ruining it. Some of the more sane people sought refuge out in nature, building cabins and homes away from the rest of the world to finally try living in peace, albeit having to fight off the odd monster attack. A false sense of order was eventually created by a group calling themselves the Imperium Pantheon, made up of powerful and generally not so chill deities from across the world. There was the Greek deity Zeus, this world's version of the Egyptian sun god Ra, who had
okay, so Zeus is actually pretty chill. I take back my insult.
Become disenchanted with humanity and never stopped his creation Sekhmet from slaughtering his own people. There was also the Slavic goddess of winter, misfortune, and death, Morana, a twisted variant of the Hindu god Shiva, who has much more of a focus on being a destroyer than a protector and creator. A dozen or so more made up the roster, and they were all brought together by a leader, a cruel deity named Tarsa, who many in the know now claim was the overseer of this world at the time. That is, until the fall of this pantheon. You see, this group created monsters unlike any the world had seen, using a golden artifact referred to in the legends as the Beast Sphere. They used these to
Beast Sphere. That's a little difficult to say.
To hunt down gods and demigods that didn't bow to their whims. The demigods could be killed, but the gods were not so easily slain, so the monsters instead would take them to an underworld of another deity in their ranks, Izanami, the Shinto goddess of death. She'd keep them trapped there, largely out of spite for her brother, who despised the fact that she was working with this pantheon. There was only one thing that could actually kill a god, a fabled power called the God Queller bloodline. It had been foretold by the fates that after 7 generations of gods from different lands having descendants consecutively, a child could be born that would then have the power to kill a god permanently. More frightening still to the deities, any children birthed from one of these beings in a God Queller bloodline would also have the power, meaning over a long enough time, they could spread like a virus and create hundreds or thousands of God Quellers. Because of this, Tarsa and her pantheon enlisted, or maybe threatened is a better word, thousands of humans to scout forested areas where many had fled to live quiet lives in search of gods and demigods that may be in hiding. They told these scouts that they were looking for those with the potential to rise up and challenge the Imperium Pantheon, but in truth, the main thing they were looking for was anyone with the potential to produce a God Queller bloodline. With so many gods having spawned children with one another, they
Hey, at least it's not just locked to one bloodline. Literally anyone can spawn it.
believed it could have come about any day, though they hadn't thought this bloodline had already been started.
Bum bum.
One of the scouts who actually wrote the very tales Parvel was referencing was a young man named Ordis Phonemo. He was not remotely a fan of the Pantheon or its intentions, but he did love spending his time out in nature. The cities had become far too divided and chaotic, so spending his times hiking and seeking people he rarely found was quite peaceful, though he did feel he was betraying his morals by working for this group. He'd been told by elders that the gods used to be kind, or at least fair and just, but he had never seen any evidence of that in his life. He'd often fantasize about himself discovering he was secretly a god or demigod and going and tearing the Pantheon apart. But he never dared to speak this out loud. He'd even get scared after thinking about it for too long, worried that one of the gods may be able to read his thoughts and send a monster to kill him. Over his first year working for the Imperium Pantheon, he only ever found 36 homes out in the wilds around New Athens. He was forced to take a drop of blood from each person he found and put it on a stone dial that he carried. If the person was mortal, the drop would turn into a puff of red smoke. If a demigod, a puff of blue. And a god, a cloud of bright yellow. Every night he was
So, red is human, blue is demi, yellow is god.
meant to pray to the god on the Pantheon who was essentially his boss to tell them if he'd found anyone, and if so, what their blood indicated. If it was a demigod or god, a member of the Pantheon would come investigate whether the being found was a threat. He'd only ever once found a demigod, and the man was not particularly threatening, just a simple farmer living a quiet life with his family. Ordis was glad to hear it, as he didn't want to bring any trouble to the man. The man's family even invited him to stay for dinner and spend the night in their home. Ordis hugely appreciated it after spending so long in the woods. He loved nature, but being in the presence of this warm and loving family reminded him how nice it was to have genuine connections with people. Ordis had liked living in a community before everyone had become so divided and angry. Maybe if the gods weren't around, that would finally be possible again. He went to sleep more stuffed than he'd been in ages, and prayed to a deity named Zamrazalak from the Pantheon. She was a daughter of both Marana and Anubis, but was unfortunately raised by her mother. She probably would have been more chill if she was raised by Anubis. In Ordis's prayer, he told her that he'd found a demigod who was not intending to cause any trouble for anyone, and simply wanted to be left alone. Ordis also stated that he didn't even seem to have much in the way of inhuman strengths, likely a second or third generation demigod. His children hadn't even registered as demigods themselves. Unfortunately, Zamrazalak wasn't intending to take chances. Ordis awoke to roars and screams in the night. He ran out of his room to see that the walls of the home had been torn off by Zamrazalak's pet beast, Mrazawa, a creature with the head of an icy jackal and a scorpion tail, which was piercing through the chest of the demigod father. His body withered and froze before the beast shattered him against the ground. The creature then looked towards the man's screaming children. Ordis wanted to run between them and the beast, but his legs wouldn't move. He just stood and watched as it approached them. He couldn't bring himself to run in front of them, but in the least he fell to his knees and began praying to Zamrazalak, telling her to call the creature off, that the demigod was dead and his children were completely human and didn't deserve to die. The creature kept approaching, and the mother wrapped her arms around the kids, trying to protect them. Just as the creature was within inches of tearing them to shreds, its mouth closed. It turned and looked angrily at Ordis on the ground praying. After a moment of staring at him in a rage, it turned, spread its black skeletal wings, and flew off in a swirl of snow.
It left.
Before Ordis could process what was happening, there was an icy, burning pain in his arm. He cried out in confusion and agony as ice froze in the shape of letters on his flesh. The ice fell away, leaving frostbitten black marks that read, "Godslave," a cruel reminder for him to know his place. He tried to apologize to the grieving family, but as expected, they just screamed for Ordis to leave. He fled from the destroyed home, knowing that he could never do that again. He spent another month moving as slowly as possible through the forests, hoping desperately never to find another home again, let alone one with a god or demigod in it. He racked his brain every night for a way out of his current predicament. If he abandoned his job and just kept praying every night, saying he never found anybody again, Zamrazalak would likely catch on eventually and just kill him. And so, he just lived on in terror of what might happen when he eventually found another home. And that day did eventually come. He found an elegant wood-carved home perched right near the top of a cliff that looked out over even more forest. Ortis was terrified to approach.
Sounds like a beautiful scenery.
He knew the odds of it being another god or demigod were low, but there was always a chance. He considered leaving and trying to think of another plan, but before he could turn around, from behind him someone said, "Who are you?" Ugh. He practically leapt out of his skin as Ortis stumbled forward and turned to see a woman with very dark skin and white markings running along her face and body. She was at least a foot taller than him and built like an Amazonian and a Viking had a baby.
Oh, damn.
I'm Ortis, and I'm a scout for the Imperium Pantheon. Seeing the marks on her skin made him nervous. They looked similar to the glowing lines and runes most gods and some demigods had lining their bodies, though hers were white and not colored, so he thought they could be possibly painted on. Then again, she did have what looked like a couple 100 pounds of firewood slung over her shoulder, and some kind of burly broad blade weapon in the other hand, suggesting at least demigod strength. She walked past him. "Well, whatever god you're playing priest for, we're not interested. Our parents were the only gods we had any interest in listening to, and they're long gone now." His hopes sank, and fear set in. "Gods? Your parents were both gods? And what do you mean we? Are there more of you here?" She dropped all the wood next to the door and opened it. "Lorna, we have an intruder." Inside, there was another woman of similar stature, but leaner and with much shorter hair, sat back in a chair reading. Lorna didn't even look over. "Not my concern, Mythal. It's your turn to deal with an intruder." The woman, apparently called Mythal, replied, "Turn? What do you mean turn? We don't take turns. We've never had an intruder before." Lorna rolled her eyes. "Well, starting now, we have a system for this, and it's your turn, I decided." Mythal shook her head, then suddenly, in a wisp of white smoke, she dashed over back to the door where Ortis stood, grabbed his shirt, and raised him into the air, walking back out of the house. "All right, mortal, state your business and give me a good reason not to hurl you off the cliff." Wait, okay, I don't like the gods either. I mean, no offense, I don't know if you're... Anyway, look, they force me to go around and look for other gods and demigods, and if I don't report back to them and tell them what I find, they'll kill me, so if you kill me, you're really just doing their work for them.
True.
Well,
true.
All right, we certainly don't want that. She sat him down and wiped her hands to unwrinkle his shirt, but did so hard enough that it felt like she'd punched him in the chest. "So, what do you have to do to keep these gods you work for from killing you,
Test your blood.
So you're not gonna throw me off the cliff?" No, I'm just bored and saying whatever comes to mind. Nothing much to do out here all these years, as you can likely tell. Lorna over there is a bundle of excitement and revelry. I need to test your blood on this dial, but if it shows that you're a god or demigod, which seems, pretty obvious you are, I'll have to pray to the goddess Zamrazalek and tell her. As soon as I do, she'll send a monster to kill you. Mythal's eyes suddenly widened excitedly. "Really? Well, let's not waste another moment then. Lorna, this gentleman needs our blood." Lorna rolled her eyes again. "I don't go..."
So, of course, Mythal must be this character, seeing as how this woman is clearly super excited for fighting, and this guy must be... Crap, I forget the name he just said.
"Around giving strangers my blood, but you have fun, sister." Mythal dashed over to her in a wisp of white smoke, then returned with a knife, at the end of which was pure black blood. Mythal then bit into her own finger. "Here, my blood and her blood." Ortis glanced past Mythal to see that Lorna now had a cut in her arm. She grumbled nonchalantly. "Ouch." Despite being confused by Mythal's willingness to go along with all this, Ortis held out the dial and she flicked both a drop of hers and her sister's blood onto it. Both burst into a cloud of mist, but not of any color Ortis had seen. The blood was black, and so was the smoke. He just stared.
Yes, the god Quellos.
In awe. After a moment, Mythal said, "Well, mortal, what now? Did it tell you the thing we already knew, that we're both gods because our parents were both gods, our grandparents were gods, and so on and so forth?" He suddenly looked at her eyes. "Wait, how many generations back were all of your family members gods? Do you know?" "Well, I believe our parents once said 7 generations. Been some time since we've seen them, though. Dad disappeared when we were 10, and Mum ran off on our 18th birthday a few years back, saying, 'By the gods, what have we done, what have we done?' Never really knew what that meant, but it was a fun last thing for a mum to say to her children. It was slowly sinking in for Ortis.
The God Quellers are born.
I never thought... I'd heard rumors of it, but I had no idea it might actually... Have you ever heard of something called the God Queller bloodline? Her eyes shot open again, and she once more grabbed him by the shirt and lifted him up. Yes, of course. Why? Please tell me your fancy plate told you that's what we are. I don't know. I've just never seen that result before, but if you are descendants of 7 generations of gods, then maybe. Yeah. She grinned widely and menacingly. I told you, Lorna. Get off your butt. We've got lots of murdering to do.
Oh,
Lorna
wow,
sat unflinching and replied, It's also your turn to do the murdering, I decided. Mythal ran back inside, still carrying Ortis, and tossed him into a chair as she grabbed a bag and started packing it. This is so exciting. I always knew we were meant for something bigger. Sister, didn't you always feel like we were meant to go out, see the world, and murder lots and lots of gods? Lorna...
Okay, now I'm starting to not want this woman anywhere near me.
Sighed. No, but you doing that and not being here does sound lovely. Ortis stood up from his chair and said, Wait, you want to go and hunt down gods? Yes, of course. Our parents told us the gods were just the worst, and they're the reason we had to hide out in these woods our whole lives. Well, you work for them, you should know. By any chance did they do that to you? She gestured to the scarred writing on his arm. Wouldn't you like to see them slain? Ortis looked at the writing, and his heart went from pounding nervously to excitedly. Yeah, I want them dead more than anything. Let's freaking go. Mythal clapped her hands together. That's the spirit. So you tell me how to find them, I'll kill them, and hopefully keep you alive long enough to find even more.
Wait, what?
Hopefully? Suddenly there was a familiar, bone-chilling roar from outside. Ortis felt his whole body freeze again, and the screams of the devastated family rang through his head. No, I didn't pray to her, I swear. But Mythal excitedly darted over to the door. Is that a monster? Here, it's been years. She swung open the...
Yes, it's apparently an ice manticore.
Door so hard it flew off its
hinges.
An icicle!
Yeah.
Lorna muttered, You're fixing that, Mythal. But the eager, possible god queller leapt out of the door, and Ortis peeked through to see the same frost jackal beast, Murzawa, outside. Though not on its own. Astride its back was the goddess Zamrazalak herself, looking quite similar to the beast she rode. You have done your job well, godslave. Your dial called out to me as soon as the Queller bloodline was found.
Oh, perfect.
Now I get the honor of snuffing it out. Murzawa lunged its scorpion tail over itself towards Mythal, and without flinching she snatched the tail's end, then just held it there for a moment. Zamrazalak muttered, Wow, that was unexpectedly good catch. Mythal yanked the creature and it...
Oh man, I can imagine this animated. It would be just like in Despicable Me 1 where Gru punches the shark and Victor is just like, he punched my shark!
flipped onto its back, dumping the goddess to the ground. The beast quickly spun itself around and snatched its jaws at the combatant holding its tail. Mythal caught its nose and held it back, but it did manage to push her across the ground, chomping and trying to get her. She released its tail and grabbed its lower jaw, but as soon as she did, it stabbed its tail into her side. She grabbed the tail and pulled it out, but had to release its lower jaw, and it managed to lunge forward more and bite her around the waist. It lashed its head back and forth before hurling her to the ground near Zamrazalak, who kicked her in the stomach while she was down, sending her rolling across the dirt. She picked herself up. Oh, you two are fun. Hit a lot harder than I thought. Ortis, toss me my blade. Zamrazalak aimed her hands and a beam of black and white snow burst towards Mythal. She darted aside to dodge the attack, but Murzawa had run up into her path and batted her to the ground with its paw. Zamrazalak was then able to hit her with a beam and start freezing her arm as Mythal tried to block it. Ortis was still paralyzed in fear. He then thought about the demigod he'd gotten killed and his family and how he'd ruined their lives. But then realized this could be his only chance to make that right. To help someone actually take down the Imperium Pantheon.
It would be the
He took a deep breath, swallowed his fear, grabbed the handle of Mythal's blade, and lifted. But it was like super heavy. He barely got it off the ground. There was no way he was throwing that thing to her. He stumbled out of the house with the blade wobbling in the air as he tried to keep it balanced. He didn't know how to get it to her without getting killed, but then realized both Zamrazalak and Murzawa were too focused on Mythal to notice him. Though terrified, he got closer to Murzawa's tail, raised the blade as high over his head as he could, then, with plenty of help from gravity, smashed the blade down, chopping the beast's tail off. The monster shrieked and whipped around. It lunged at Ortis, and he couldn't lift the blade in time to protect himself. But luckily, Mythal jumped up and caught the beast by one of its wings with her unfrozen arm. She shook off her other arm, grabbed the wing with it as well, then whipped the creature around in a circle and tossed it at Zamrzalak. The beast crashed into its master, and Mythal darted over to Ortis. Didn't want me to have all the fun? I can respect that. You're braver than I gave you credit for. Ortis didn't mention that if he could have tossed her the blade and hidden, he probably would have done that. She snatched the blade and cocked her wrist. As soon as she did, her eyes started glowing white, and a swirl of mist burst from her arm and surrounded the weapon. Zamrzalak just managed to get out from under her beast when Mythal sprang over in a cloud of mist. Mythal grabbed her by the neck and slammed her into the ground. Tell me, are you the one who put that mark on my new friend's arm?
Yes, I am. And what are you going to do about it, Inkblood? Puh!
Murzawa recovered and thrust its head towards Mythal, but she just casually swung her blade in a circle and severed the beast's head, making its icy blue blood splash across Zamrzalak's face. Well, perhaps I could give him one of your arms. She drove her blade down into the goddess's shoulder and hacked it off with one swipe. Mythal was clearly hoping for a response from Zamrzalak, but before she could get more than an agonized scream, a white mark from the slice spread across her entire body and shifted the goddess into a pale, crusted powder. She completely stopped moving, and what was left of her just crumbled. Mythal stood up and wiped some of the powder off her.
I'm doubting the god would die that easy. She ran, she booked it, she left.
Hand onto her leg. Oh, that's a shame. I didn't realize it would be that fast. She turned around to see Ortis's astounded expression. You killed a god. You actually killed a god. Certainly seems that way, doesn't it? She said excitedly. Lorna, did you see that? Did you see what I did? Clearly not having looked up from her reading, she said, Every second, marvelously done. Mythal poked the beheaded beast with her sword. This creature's flesh is likely quite foul. Pity. She grabbed it by the stump of its tail and tossed it off the cliff with one hand. Well, my friend, that was quite exhilarating, but I'm not satisfied. Shall we be off to kill more gods? Ortis was terrified, but also on the brink of tearing up with how excited he was. Yes, absolutely, yes! Wonderful. Lorna, we're off adventuring. Come join us if you wish. Lorna just groaned. Fix the door first, Mythal. Walking away and pushing Ortis along, she replied, What was that? I can't hear you. We're too far away now. Bye. You're the worst, Mythal. I love you too, sister. Goodbye. You fix the door. You fix it. Bye. As Parvel was concluding...
This is great. I'm so sad that I missed out on this.
The story, he started to say how Mythal and Ortis would go...
But hey, now I can catch up.
...go on to do some really cool stuff, but then was cut off by the crowd of listening students, telling him not to just spoil how it all went. They wanted to hear the rest. Parvel said he hadn't really intended to tell the whole story. There wasn't any time left at that campfire today, but he supposed if people cared enough, he could continue the adventures of Mythal Lethal at a later date.
And boom! That's how you do the first episode. Oh man, I can't wait for next week now. I know I'm behind, but I can catch up. Unless the Summoner's Beast story continues.
I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Mythal Lethal and know that I have already started planning out episode 2 and a full kind of arc for how this story could go as a limited series. And as some of you may have noticed lately with how Vigilance has been going, I'm not really making decisions anymore based on how things do views-wise, more based off of just what I want to make. So episode 2 could come pretty soon. Just in general, I am planning on branching out more with where I release stuff. Vigilance is already going up on Spotify as well as on YouTube now, and I'm planning on taking Vigilance and maybe even Mythal Lethal, and once I've done enough episodes, turn those into a book that I self-publish as ebooks and sell hard copies of. Because I still love having YouTube as my main hub for where I release stuff, but it has started to prove that as it goes through changes, it's a little bit too unreliable to have as my sole main source of income. Especially as I start branching into more original series, which I'm super excited about doing more of. Though there is still going to be more pop culture stuff coming as well. On Friday, I've got Amazing Digital Circus SCP's Part 3 coming, and then I'll have 3 different My Singing Monsters episodes coming in May because I'm doing a collaboration with the My Singing Monsters team. that I'm super excited about. But anyway, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote I've probably used before, but I really like it and I read it again this week by someone named Alicia Lockhart, who said, "Life became a lot simpler when I decided to just let some people misunderstand me." It's not always worth your energy to try and explain yourself in detail or your opinions or how you live your life to everyone out there. Because no matter how much you try to explain it, some people just aren't gonna like it. But that shouldn't stop you from living the way that feels in alignment with your true self. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in Amazing Digital Circus at the thing. I said it. It's coming on Friday. Goodbye.
Alright everyone, that's going to be the end of today's video, and I hope you all enjoyed. Just remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below, so remember to support the original creator and all they do, and I'll see all of y'all next time when we flick back on. Till then, this is Fox, signing out. Peace.